My name is Harriet. No, wait. Let me start over. My name is Gloria. Gloria Tate. I'm 63 years old, and until about 8 months ago, I thought I understood what the word family meant. I spent 31 years as a licensed practical nurse at Mercy Regional Hospital in Columbus, Ohio. 31 years of double shifts, holidays away from home, nights where I drove home at 2 in the morning, so exhausted I had to open the windows just to stay awake. I wasn't rich. I never pretended to be. But I saved. Lord, did I save. Every paycheck I'd put something away. Not for a vacation, not for a new car. I drove the same 2009 Honda Accord for 14 years. I saved because I watched too many patients come through that hospital with nothing, no insurance, no family, no cushion, and I promised myself that would never be me. By the time I retired, I had a little over $240,000 in savings and retirement accounts. I owned my house outright, a 3-bedroom in a quiet neighborhood east of the city, nothing fancy, but mine. I had no debt. I had my health. I had my son. I thought that was everything. My son's name is Brandon. He was born when I was 32, after a marriage that ended quietly and without much drama. His father moved to Arizona when Brandon was 4 and sent birthday cards until he stopped sending them around age 9. So it was just us, just Brandon and me in that 3-bedroom house, and I made sure he never felt the absence. I went to every school play. I drove him to basketball practice at 6 in the morning. I helped him with college applications until midnight. When he got into Ohio State, I cried in the parking lot of a Dollar General because I didn't want him to see me fall apart. Brandon was the thing I was most proud of. He had my stubbornness and his father's charm, which is a combination that gets a person very far in life and also sometimes into trouble. He graduated with a degree in business administration, got a decent job at a logistics company downtown. Life was going the way it was supposed to go. Then he met Amber. I want to be careful here because I've had time to think about this. And I don't want to be the kind of mother-in-law who blames everything on the wife. That's too easy, and it's not entirely true. But I also won't pretend Amber didn't change things because she did. She changed them in ways I didn't notice until the changes were already permanent. Amber was 26 when they met. Pretty in a sharp sort of way, very put together. She had a large family, 3 brothers, parents still married, lots of holidays and get-togethers. I thought that was wonderful at first. I thought, my son is going to have a real family. The kind he missed out on. I was genuinely happy for him. They got engaged after 2 years and married the following spring. I contributed $15,000 toward the wedding. Not because anyone asked me. I want to be clear about that. I offered. Brandon said it wasn't necessary. I insisted. That's on me. The first time he called to ask for money, it was 8 months after the wedding. He said they'd found a house they loved in Westerville, good school district, nice neighborhood, move-in ready. The asking price was $380,000. They'd been pre-approved but were short on the down payment. Could I help with $20,000? I said yes. I told myself it was an investment in his future. I told myself this was what parents did when they could. I did not ask about a repayment timeline. That was my mistake, the first of many, and I didn't recognize it as a mistake until much later. 6 months after they moved in, Brandon called again. Amber had decided she wanted to go back to school for her MBA. The program was expensive, out-of-state tuition, even though she was doing it online. Something about a specific accreditation. Would I be able to help with the first year? Just the first year, he said. 22,000. I remember sitting at my kitchen table with my coffee going cold and doing the math in my head. I had already given them 20,000 for the house, now 22 more. I sat there for a moment, then I said yes. I told myself education was never a waste. I told myself Amber working toward a higher degree would benefit both of them, and by extension, any grandchildren they might have someday. I did not ask where Amber's parents were in this equation. Her father had a good job. Her mother ran a small catering business. I thought about that, and then I let myself not think about it, because that felt like keeping score, and keeping score felt ungenerous. Looking back, I understand now that the score was already being kept, just not by me. The requests came roughly every 9 to 10 months after that. A car because Amber's transmission died and the repair wasn't worth it, 9,000. A medical bill from a procedure that their insurance covered poorly, 6,500. A business idea Brandon had, a logistics consulting venture he wanted to launch on the side. He needed seed money for software licenses and a website and some marketing, 18,000. I gave it all. Every time I told myself a different story. This is the last one. This one is different. This one will come back to me. This one is an investment, not a gift. Brandon always said the same words, "I'll pay you back, Mum, I promise." And I believe he meant it when he said it. I do. But meaning something and doing something are two different things. And not once in 4 years did a single dollar come back to me. I want you to understand something about why I kept saying yes. It wasn't stupidity, though I've called myself stupid plenty since. It was loneliness, partly. Brandon was all I had. His father was gone. My own parents had passed. I had friends from work, but they had their own families, their own lives. When Brandon called me, I felt needed. I felt connected. I told myself that was worth something. What I didn't understand was that I was paying for the feeling of being needed, and when the money eventually ran out, the feeling would run out with it. I also want to say this, because the women watching this will understand it, even if they don't want to. There is a particular kind of guilt that mothers carry. A guilt that says you were never quite enough, you could always give more, and any hesitation is a failure of love. I carried that guilt for 31 years of nursing and counting, and Brandon, maybe without even knowing it, had learned exactly how to touch it. I don't think he did it with cruelty. I think he did it with carelessness, which is a different thing. Cruelty requires intention. Carelessness just requires never having been required to look someone in the eye and reckon with what you've cost them. The last time I gave them money was 14 months ago. Brandon called and said they were refinancing the house to pull out equity, but the bank needed proof of additional assets to finalize the rate. Could I transfer 45,000 into an account they'd send me, just temporarily, just for the paperwork to clear, and he'd transfer it right back within 30 days? I hesitated for the first time. 45,000. That was different from the others. That was a number I could feel the edges of. He heard the hesitation. He said, "Mom, I wouldn't ask if it wasn't important." He said, "You know I'm good for it." He said, "I just need to know you believe in us." That last line, that's the one that got me. I just need to know you believe in us. As if the money were a vote of confidence, a measure of my faith in my son and his marriage, a test I could pass or fail. I transferred the 45,000. The 30 days came and went. I waited another 2 weeks before saying anything. Brandon said the closing was delayed, the bank was slow, it would be soon. Another month passed. When I called, Amber answered and told me Brandon was in a meeting, and her voice had that particular flatness that told me she already knew why I was calling and had decided not to care. At this point, I had given them in total somewhere between $212,000 and $218,000. I kept a notebook. I'm a nurse. I've always kept records. I had every date, every amount, every stated reason. What I didn't have was a single receipt of repayment, because there had never been any repayment, not even partial, not even symbolic. I want to tell you where I was in my own life at this point, because I think it matters. I had been having some health issues. Nothing dramatic. I was told that initially. Fatigue that I chalked up to retirement. A lump that I found during a self-exam in January. The kind of thing you notice and then try to unnotice for a few weeks before you make the appointment. The biopsy came back the last week of February. Stage 2 breast cancer. The recommended course was surgery followed by radiation and possibly chemotherapy, depending on the margins. I sat in my car in the hospital parking lot, the same hospital where I'd worked for 31 years, and I read the paperwork 3 times. Then I opened my banking app. I want to tell you what I saw when I opened that app, because I think you already know, and knowing and hearing it are two different kinds of pain. I had $41,000 left. 41,000 from what had been 240,000. The rest was in Brandon's house and Brandon's car and Amber's MBA and the 30-day loan that had become a permanent gift without anyone saying so out loud. I need you to understand, $41,000 is not nothing. But $41,000 is also not enough to cover a cancer surgery, 6 weeks of radiation, potential chemotherapy, and the reduced income of a woman who is 63 years old and no longer working. Not in America. Not in 2025. Not if anything goes wrong. I sat in that parking lot for a long time. I called Brandon that evening. I told him about the diagnosis. His response was genuine. I could hear it, the sharp inhale, the "Oh God, Mom." He said he was sorry. He said he'd come see me. I believed him about the sorry part. I told him I was going to need help covering the treatment costs, that I was looking at potentially depleting what I had left, and that I needed to talk seriously about what he could do to help repay some of what I'd given them. He went quiet. Not a thoughtful quiet, a calculating one. I know the difference. I spent 31 years reading silences in hospital rooms. He said he'd talked to Amber. He said they were stretched right now. He said the timing was hard. Amber never called. 2 weeks later, I got a text from Brandon. Not a call, a text, telling me they were having a small family dinner on Saturday, just immediate family, and it would be low-key. I assumed I was invited. I was his mother. What kind of question was that? I made a green bean casserole, Brandon's favorite, the one I'd made for every Thanksgiving and Easter of his life. I drove 40 minutes to their house in Westerville on a cold Saturday in March. I rang the doorbell with the casserole dish in my hands. Amber opened the door. She looked at me and she looked at the casserole, and her face did something I don't have a precise word for. It wasn't surprise. It was more like the mild inconvenience of an unexpected complication. She said, "Oh, this is just for immediate family tonight." I said, "I'm his mother." She said, "Right, but it's just us and my family. It's just her side of things tonight." Brandon appeared behind her. He looked at me. He looked at the casserole. He said, "Hey, Mom." And then, like he was reading something off a card he'd rehearsed, "Tonight's kind of a family thing. Just, I'm sorry." I stood on the porch of the house I helped pay for, and my son told me I was not family. I don't remember the drive home. I remember the casserole dish on the passenger seat. I remember pulling into my driveway and sitting there until the car got cold. I am 63 years old. I have held the hands of dying strangers. I have worked night shifts on Christmas. I thought I understood what hard felt like. I had not understood it completely until that moment. I went inside. I did not cry, or rather I cried and then I stopped, because crying felt like giving something away I wanted to keep. I sat at the kitchen table where I had done my son's homework with him, where I had filled out his FAFSA, where I had taken all those calls and done all that math and told myself each time that it was love. Then I opened my laptop. I called my bank the next morning and I stopped the automatic transfers I'd been making to a joint account Brandon and I had set up years ago for emergencies. It didn't have much in it, maybe $200 a month, but I stopped it. I called my attorney, a woman I'd used for my will and the house title, and I made an appointment. I went through my notebook and I typed every transaction into a spreadsheet, every dollar, every date, every stated purpose. $214,800. That's what it came to, precisely. I did not call Brandon. He called me 12 days later. He said Amber had told him she thought I seemed upset at the door, and he just wanted to check in. That was how he framed it. Amber thought I seemed upset, as if what I had felt were a passing mood, the kind of thing that resolves itself with a little time and a check-in call. I told him I needed him to confirm the repayment plan for the $214,000 I had loaned them over 4 years. Silence. Then, Mom, we talked about this. Most of that was gifts. I said, "You told me every single time that you would pay me back. I have the dates, the amounts, and your exact words in a notebook." He said, "I didn't think you were actually keeping track." I want you to sit with that sentence for a moment because I have sat with it for months. I didn't think you were actually keeping track. What that sentence means underneath the words is, I assumed your generosity was unconditional. I assumed there would be no accounting. I assumed that being your son was sufficient collateral for $250,000. I told him I had consulted with my attorney. I told him I intended to file a formal claim for repayment, and that the notebook and my bank records would be submitted as evidence of the loans. I told him this was not something I wanted to do, but that I was facing cancer treatment costs and I did not have the luxury of being sentimental about money anymore. He said, "I can't believe you're doing this to our family." I said, "Brandon, the night you told me I wasn't family and sent me home with a casserole, I drove 40 minutes to bring you. That was the night something happened to our family. I'm just the one responding to it." He hung up. I had the surgery in April, a lumpectomy, successful. The radiation ran 6 weeks, 5 days a week, 40-minute drives each way because the good facility was across town. I lost about 12 pounds. I was tired in a way that feels different from normal tired. It goes into your bones. I drove myself to most of the appointments because I didn't want to ask anyone. I'm stubborn. I know that about myself. My attorney sent a formal demand letter to Brandon and Amber in May. They hired their own attorney, a younger man who sent back a letter claiming the transfers had been voluntary gifts with no documented repayment terms, which is true technically. I had never made them sign anything. I had believed that being his mother and his word were enough. That's the thing I am still the most angry about. Not the money, not entirely. The fact that I trusted his word, and he knew I trusted his word, and he used that trust as a loophole. The legal process is ongoing. My attorney believes we have a reasonable case based on the communications, Brandon's own statements, and the pattern of requests. But she is also honest with me that cases like this are hard, especially between parent and child, especially without signed agreements. We may recover some. We may not recover all. I have stopped trying to calculate what I'll get back. That calculation was making me sick in a different way than the cancer did. What I have instead is clarity, which arrived the way clarity often does, late and a little ruthlessly. I understand now that my son is not a bad person in the way villains are bad people. He's a man who was never required to be accountable to me because I kept releasing him from accountability with another check, another transfer, another "of course, I believe in you." I taught him, without meaning to, that my love had no flaw. He walked across that floor for 4 years and never once looked down. I understand now that Amber is not the cause of this, even though it would be simpler if she were. She is a woman who recognized an arrangement that benefited her and saw no reason to disrupt it. I can be angry at her and also know that the arrangement existed before she arrived and was maintained by two people, my son and me. I understand now that the loneliness that made me keep saying yes is real, and I am working on it. With a therapist I started seeing in June, a woman about 10 years younger than me who has a directness I appreciate. She asked me in our third session, when I first felt like Brandon's approval was something I needed to earn. I cried for about 20 minutes before I could answer her. That's a different story, and maybe someday I'll tell it. What I can tell you is this. 3 weeks ago, Brandon came to my door. Not a text, not a call. He came to the house where he grew up, where his height is still marked on the kitchen door frame in pencil from age 6 to 16, where his childhood drawings were on the refrigerator long after they stopped being age-appropriate, because I never took them down. He knocked. I opened the door. He looked older than I remembered, or maybe I was just looking at him differently. He said he'd been thinking. He said Amber and he had been fighting. He said he'd been thinking about the night at the door, and he couldn't. He started over 2 or 3 times. He said he couldn't stop seeing my face when he told me it was family only. I didn't say anything. I waited. He said, "I'm sorry, Mom. I know that's not enough. I know I can't just say that and have it mean something after everything, but I am." I looked at my son standing on my porch, 41 years old, still holding his car keys in his hand, the way he used to hold his backpack straps when he was nervous as a teenager. I said, "I know you are." I didn't invite him in that day. I wasn't ready for that. But I didn't close the door on him either. I stood there for a few minutes and we talked on the porch, the way neighbors talk when they haven't seen each other in a while. Carefully, with some distance still in it, but present. That's where we are now, somewhere on a porch, figuring out what comes next. I don't know if I'll ever get the money back. Not all of it. I don't know if my son and I will find our way back to what we were, or whether what we build next will be something different, something with more honesty in the foundation. I don't know a lot of things. What I know is that I had surgery and I drove myself to radiation 30 times and I came out the other side. I know that I have my house and my notebook and my $41,000, which is being managed now with considerably more intention than anything I gave away. I know that a woman who spent 31 years caring for other people is allowed to care for herself. It took me 63 years to learn that, and it cost me more than I want to add up. But I am still here. I am still learning, and the casserole dish is back in my cabinet where it belongs. I still think about that casserole dish on the passenger seat. Not the money, not the diagnosis. That green bean casserole, sitting there in the cold car while I couldn't make myself go inside. 31 years of nursing, and that's the image that stays with me. The thing I made with my hands for someone who didn't want me at his table. There's a cause and an effect to everything, and I spent a long time trying to figure out which one I was in this story. The truth is, I was both. Every time I wired money without a signed agreement, every time I accepted "I'll pay you back" as a binding contract, every time I let the fear of losing my son override the common sense I used every single day at work, I was making a choice. I just didn't recognize it as one. I thought I was being a good mother. What I was actually doing was confusing love with transaction and then pretending the transaction wasn't happening. That's not a moral failure exactly. It's a failure of clear thinking, and I say that as someone who prides herself on being clear-headed. I could read a chart, catch a medication error, advocate for a patient when the doctor wasn't listening. But I could not look at my own son and say, this pattern is unsustainable, and you are letting it continue. Smart women make this mistake. Capable women make this mistake. The intelligence we apply to everything else somehow goes quiet when the person asking is someone we raised. What I understand now is that real wisdom isn't just knowing things, it's being willing to apply what you know even when it costs you something. I knew on some level that Brandon and Amber were not going to repay me. I knew it the second time I gave money without any repayment on the first. I kept that knowledge in a drawer and closed the drawer because opening it felt like giving up on my son. But here's what I've learned. Seeing someone clearly is not the same as giving up on them. You can love a person and still require them to be accountable. Those two things are not opposites. I had to have cancer and an empty savings account to understand that, which is a harder way to learn it than I'd wish on anyone. The other thing I've been sitting with is this. Getting back up is not automatic. After the surgery, after the radiation, after the legal letters and the silence from Brandon and the months of driving myself to appointments alone, there were mornings when staying in bed felt like the only sensible response to the situation, and I got up anyway, not because I was fearless, because I decided that 63 is not the end of anything, and that a woman who spent 3 decades taking care of other people at their most vulnerable is capable of taking care of herself. That decision, made over and over on the mornings when it wasn't easy, is the only reason I'm here to tell the story. Brandon came to the porch. I didn't close the door. I don't know yet what that grows into, whether it becomes something real and honest, or whether it stays a porch conversation for a long time, but I showed up for it. The same way I showed up for 31 years of shifts, the same way I showed up at his dinner with a casserole dish in my hands. I showed up. That's still who I am. The difference now is that I know what I'm worth when I do,